One of the most controversial movies of the year, Blonde has hit Netflix to bring us the tragic life of beloved actress and sex symbol Marilyn Monroe. Filtered through a lens equal parts traumatic and psychedelic, director Andrew Dominik has given us one of the most uncomfortable personal films we're likely to see this year. Also, a content warning. This movie contains scenes of SA, multiple forms of abuse, and self-harm. There's not a lot of jokes to be made here. This is a sad story, so viewer discretion is advised. I'm Joey C. Let's go! Throughout the film, you'll see that director Andrew Dominik has decided to largely adhere to aspect ratios more befitting of the era of Monroe's films. The intent here is to represent the different mental states of Marilyn and the characters that are connected to her life. Although the movie was intended to be shot on 16mm film, unfortunately, Netflix has a digital cinematography regulation, and this didn't happen. This movie has a few religious allusions in regards to how Marilyn's life is presented. One of the early scenes sees Norma Jean being drowned by her abusive mom as punishment for being an unwanted child that caused her father to move away. This is followed by them attempting to escape a California flash fire with the intent to seek asylum in her dad's fireproof mansion. With that failing, Marilyn's mom proceeds to beat her child to the point where she runs into the arms of her neighbors. This is sort of a baptism by fire where Marilyn's hope that one day she'll see her dad saves her from her torment, leading her to be transformed into the identity of Marilyn Monroe. Upon leaving her abusive home to move on to one of several orphanages, the film's aesthetic makes the first shift to monochrome to reflect the movies of the time. This is immediately followed by her first of many scenes in the LA actor circle. These scenes in particular see her doing line reads for an up-and-coming movie, the lines in question paralleling the trauma we as the audience have witnessed. An overarching theme of the film is how Marilyn struggles with the lack of control over her life. Her journey begins with her mother choking her in the bathtub, and that trauma has a metaphorical chokehold over her throughout her life, manifesting itself in many forms. One of the most direct forms is whenever she's forced to commit a sexual act to advance her career, the male in question always takes her by the throat. This extends to her second husband taking issue with her doing pinup shoots in an attempt to control her life. In a tryout for her starring role in Don't Bother to Knock, Marilyn's struggle to win over the film's producer pushes her to say, "I'll be any way you want me to be." On the surface, this is just her professing her abilities to play all manner of roles, but it's also indicative of a larger struggle she'll face over the course of the story. A struggle between her stage identity of Marilyn Monroe versus her original identity of Norma Jean. As the film progresses, we'll see this become a struggle she ultimately loses. Her journey of falling into the role of Marilyn on and off the screen begins here, and the tragic irony of it all is that it's the only way for her to make it out of hell. I know that might seem like a bit of a leap, but considering that before she performs her script read, she looks at the ladder off to the side. The ladder is often seen as a symbol of a connection between heaven and hell, and Marilyn views her acting career as the only means to earn the notice of her parents. Considering the dialogue of the film clearly speaks to her trauma and abandonment issues, it's clear why she sees this situation as such an important juncture in her life. After landing her first leading role and kickstarting her career, Norma visits her mother in Norwalk State Hospital. This is the third scene shot in Technicolor at this point, the prior two being Norma's opening trauma and her scene where she landed her first role by performing a favor for the producer. Despite that, the color palette of the scene is largely black and white, with a few shades of gray in between. This extends from the stark walls of the hospital to the clothes Norma and her mom are wearing. This helps illustrate the beginning of her descent into the role of Marilyn Monroe, as her mom's progression into dementia prevents her from recognizing her daughter all these years later. Considering that this movie is based on a book that's a fictionalization of Marilyn's life, the way this scene begins to blur the lines between fiction and reality is quite fitting. Right after the revelation that Marilyn's mom no longer recognizes her, Marilyn's mom begins rubbing her hands together. This is followed by an immediate reverse match cut of Marilyn rubbing her own hands during the pivotal scene in Don't Bother to Knock. In that film, she plays a mentally ill babysitter, and during the scene in question, she produces a razor blade attempting to unalive herself. We also see that she possesses a scar on her right cheek, which, while being part of the scene she was acting in, could be read as her scars from her trauma deepening throughout her acting career. This scene already did a great job impressing how Marilyn literally carries her trauma with her, but it goes a step further when Marilyn views the director as her mother, yelling at her to unalive herself. As her acting career begins to bloom, so do Marilyn's problems. Thankfully, she's able to find some solace between two men she meets through the LA actor circle, Charlie Chaplain Jr. and Eddie G. Robinson Jr. They engage in a threesome they later dub the Geminis, that becomes the talk of the town to a controversial degree. This relationship is set during the time Marilyn starred in the movie Niagara, a noir thriller that featured her engaged character engaging in a scandalous affair with another man. The parallels at play here are pretty clear, but not as clear as the bed sheets they make love atop melting into the falls themselves. This is one of the many elements of the film, and novel fabricate for the sake of the story, but it is based in some degree of fact. Charlie Chaplain Jr. stated in his 1960 autobiography that him and Marilyn were in a relationship, although there was no mention of there being a third person. Funnily enough, dubbing the trio the Geminis has some significance. Marilyn herself was a Gemini, even though Chaplain Jr. wasn't, and their scenes together plays an important role in Marilyn finding her own happiness and discovering her identity. Charlie and Eddie refer to the trio as twins, and considering this relationship leads to the first of 3 pregnancies Marilyn will experience throughout the film, their eventual separation can be seen as a clue for how Marilyn's life continuously falls apart. Marilyn makes another visit to the Norwalk State Hospital, where we can see her mom has a facial scar just like the one Marilyn sported in Don't Bother to Knock. While Marilyn is informing her mother of how her life and career have progressed, we see her mom lying seemingly lifeless in a bathtub. These character details illustrate the tragedy of how the trauma has affected them both, ultimately bringing the mom to where she had last left her daughter as a child. While this scene largely maintains the black and white color palette, despite being shot in Technicolor, we can see the bathroom walls are green, given that this and the next scene revolve around Marilyn's pregnancy. It's a fitting choice as green represents life and fertility. The next scene sees Norma hopping into a car for the purpose of getting an abortion at the request of the movie studio executives. The color palette in the scene, much like the previous one, is comprised of black, white, and green to represent how Norma's life is currently engrossed by her pregnancy. However, as she complies with the hospital trip, she sees a red stop sign that wakes her up to the reality of what's going on, causing her to attempt to escape from the situation. Unfortunately, she's brought to the operating table, where we can assume her child is successfully aborted. I say that we can assume because after scrambling out of the operating room, she enters her burning house from when she was a child. She makes her way to her room and opens up a chest of drawers, finding her baby while the house burns down around her. As a child, her mom pointed out that Norma slept in drawers as an infant. This scene illustrates her attempting to have a child and nurturing a new life as her way of reclaiming the childhood and family she could never have. Unfortunately, this won't be the last time that this opportunity was taken from her. After recovering from her loss, we see the return to a monochrome color palette as the dialogue in Marilyn's latest acting venture indicates that she did indeed lose her child. We see her in a restaurant while a song plays in the background. The lyrics, "I'll be lonely," paints a clear picture of her current life. It's only fitting that this scene leads her to meet the quote, ex-athlete, a character based on the baseball star and Monroe's ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio. Joe and Marilyn's romance was short-lived and extremely toxic, and Blonde doesn't shy away from representing that. Blonde's central struggle is that of Norma trying to piece her life together as it crashes around her at every possible moment. This theme is made most clear during her first meeting with the ex-athlete, where she describes life as a jigsaw puzzle. This extends beyond the life of the character, as it can be experienced through the film's somewhat erratic editing, through the warping aspect ratios to the deliberate changing to the color palettes. The film definitely puts a lot on the part of the audience to infer the story's greater meaning. This definitely seems to be intentional on the part of the director, as he described the film as an avalanche of images and events, with the script containing little dialogue. While there's plenty of dialogue in the film, several sequences rely heavily on purely visual storytelling and surrealist imagery. Several scenes will either cut abruptly to the next one, or bleed into each other with little rhyme or reason. It kind of shows how Marilyn has lost control of her life. Throughout the film, Marilyn receives messages from her distant father that promises their reunion. As she walks the red carpet on the way to the premiere of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, great movie by the way, cameras flash and the paparazzi shower her in praise. Upon approaching the movie theater doors, she is approached by a woman who states that someone special wants to see her in her hotel room after the premiere. Norma's mind immediately jumps to her father, and she spends the night anticipating their reunion. However, the guest in her room ends up being dating the ex-athlete, who appeared with the intent to marry her on the spot. They end up going through with it, and throughout their relationship, Norma refers to him as Daddy. This continues the trend of Norma desperately trying to find the love she was denied in some form of a family, and it doesn't end well. As Marilyn awaits her guests during the premiere of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, we witness the scene where she performs the now iconic Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. The scene depicted on the silver screen is primarily red and bathes the audience in a red light. This is meant to foreshadow the ex-athlete's marriage proposal in a sinister light, and you can see it on Marilyn's face. When the ex-athlete proposes to Marilyn, he states that he just wants to make Marilyn happy, but Marilyn responds with, "I've always been happy," but we all know that that's a lie. Following their marriage, we see Marilyn palling around with her husband's extended family, struggling to find her place amongst a largely Italian-speaking home. To further illustrate how lost she feels at this stage of her life, she admits that she isn't an actor, just some blonde. She even admits that her hair is fake to the laughter and derision of those around her. The scene that follows sees her husband meeting with Charlie and Eddie Jr. at a restaurant, presenting lewd photos of Marilyn taken voluntarily, as this has been her outlet for satisfaction and personal gratification, as she started to embrace being a sex symbol. Marilyn's marriage ultimately collapses after filming her iconic subway grate scene in The 7-Year Itch, another good movie. Even if you don't know the movie itself, you know the shot in question, Marilyn's dress getting blown up around her while standing over a subway grate. The scene transitions from a cramped black and white 4:3 to a full 21:9 in full Technicolor. This is to illustrate that Norma is truly being herself in this moment, taking joy in being both an actress and a sex symbol. The scene immediately starts flipping between black and white shots of varying aspect ratios, featuring a lot of indulgent slow-mo, to more cramped 4:3s when focusing on the film crew, who are clearly perving on her, settling on a black and white wide shot that focuses on her husband, who looks on in grief and disgust. The domestic abuse that precedes this scene brings an end to this 9-month mistake of a marriage. The third act of the movie cuts to New York 1955, where we see a playwright make his way to a script reading on his latest work, Magda. While unnamed, this character is based on Marilyn Monroe's second husband, Arthur Miller. After the script reading, the two bond over their mutual love of poetry and literature. This is a stark contrast to her relationship with the ex-athlete, who didn't understand that side of life at all. As their relationship blossoms over a single conversation, she tells the playwright that he can call her whatever he wants, as long as she can call him Daddy. The scene ends with the most jarring aspect ratio change yet, as the frame resembles a smartphone screen, only showing Marilyn clutching her soon-to-be husband's hand. You can probably guess where this is heading. Marilyn's second marriage starts as a pleasant one, but ultimately deteriorates upon finding out that her husband has been using her as inspiration for his work, followed by a disturbingly graphic miscarriage. Her mental state doesn't fare much better moving forward, as she ends up breaking character in multiple roles, storming off the set to return home. In the process, she ends up scratching her face deeply, possibly trying to mutilate the perfect face she has been putting on in some act of defiance. We can see that she's scarred in the exact same spot as before, although now there are 3 of them, and much like comedy, it seems tragedy also happens in threes. The final stretch of the film opens in 1962, which is the year that Marilyn Monroe died. After being dragged out of a plane by the Secret Service, the intoxicated Marilyn is brought to the bedside of then-President John F. Kennedy. Despite claiming that nothing sexual was between them, the scene goes where you think it does, and Marilyn monologues to herself about how she needs to play her part and how she should be happy that a little girl who came from nowhere is now in bed with the leader of the free world. Shots of her with the president are intercut with the TV, initially depicting a rocket launch, which could be the Friendship 7, a shuttle that included the first American to orbit Earth that launched in February of that year. This is the most speculative entry on the list, and it could all just be a bunch of nothing, but considering the amount of heavy-handed symbolism in this movie, anything is possible. We cut back to the TV where the spaceship footage has been replaced with a sci-fi B-movie where a UFO crashes into the Washington Monument and the Capitol building. Considering that Marilyn is played by Cuban-American actress Anda De Armas, and this happens to coincide with her dialogue about her coming all this way to meet the leader of the free world, it has to mean something, right? While their relationship was largely rumored in real life, maybe the movie is trying trying to say that her invading the White House would destabilize America? Considering JFK was assassinated a year later, anything is possible. Certain angry people on the internet were initially frustrated that Marilyn was being depicted by a non-white person, which is a dumb thing to get mad about. Despite Marilyn actually being a white person of European descent, much like Anda De Armas, so these wires probably don't cross at all. A reoccurring prop in the movie is a stuffed puppy dog that Norma had as a child, finding it again on various occasions. During the final scene of the movie, Marilyn is mailed a stuffed puppy dog along with a final letter from her father. She's received a few throughout the film. The contents of each coincide with her mental state at the time. We see the final letter literally write itself. Quote, "There was never a tearful father. Love Cass," unquote, with the word love crossed out. This package was from Charlie Chaplain Jr. in an attempt to bring Norma back to reality. Following this, we see Marilyn pass out on her bed alongside a real puppy, which is actually played by Anda De Armas' dog. Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else in between, you made it to the end of the video. What did you think of Blonde? Did we notice anything that you didn't? If so, let us know in the comments below. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching.